everybody. Welcome to another edition of the West Springfield Rotary Club's West Side Legacy Stories. I'm Nick Odell here today, and with me is Ned Bowler. Ned, how's it going today?
Very good. Glad to be here.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
And for the record, can you tell me your name, your birthday, and where you were born?
Yeah. Ned Bowler. Birthday is December 5th, 1930. I was lived not in West Springfield, born in Springfield, but the family was over here. There was no hospitals here at that time.
And how long have you lived in West Springfield for?
Well, I'm 88, so there were 14 years that I was not in West Springfield. That was college, and prior to that, served in Korea.
Nice. And so what changes in town have you noticed the most over the years?
Well, the populations exploded when we lived in West Springfield. There, I can remember that you're talking possibly maybe 14,000 people, and it's just that it has exploded now to, I think we're 127 or something like that. I didn't mean 12 and 14. I made the mistake on that. 112,000, and now we're up to 130 of us almost in our community here. So our neighborhoods were very small. There were a lot of the highways were, for example, Riverdale was a 2-lane highway. Route 20 up near where I was living was 2 lanes, and then eventually became 3, and then eventually 4. So seen a lot of changes in those years.
Yeah, and so you were born here, right? Or were you not born here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what do you miss most about the way it used to be?
Well, I think the closeness we had was fantastic when we were kids growing up. We were outside all the time. We were not inside. There was, other than a radio, there was no amusements per se in the house. Spent a lot of time outside playing in the neighborhoods, playing a lot of ball, and just a very comfortable way of life at that particular time. I don't recall when I was young, I was the middle child of my older sister was 8 years older. My younger sister was 4 years younger. I don't remember many times of our neighborhood locking the doors even at nighttime. So it was a very relaxing and good time growing up. We had a lot of fun.
What are some of your best memories of the good old days?
Well, I started to tell you that. In the neighborhood, we did everything together. We had dawn to dusk. We were outside playing. We just had good feeling all the way around. I lived up in Tatham, and I went to school at St. Thomas. So there were no school buses back then. So
Right.
You either got dropped off or you had a bike and you went down there to that. So but there was a wonderful feeling and a great closeness, and that I look now and it's entirely different. I mean, go ahead. I can take the next question. I'm not doing well, I'm going to tell you.
Yeah, it's all right. I think you're doing a fantastic job so far.
Yeah.
So do you remember any great stories or legends about this town?
Great stories or legends?
Yeah. Do you remember any great stories, legends about this town? Maybe.
Well, we had tremendous athletes, and Leo DeRocher was born and brought up here, and I'm trying to think of some of the others there. The sports was a big thing in this town, very much so. I personally, when I got out of St. Thomas after 8 years, I was hopeful to go to the high school because I knew Garrett Clark, who was the coach up there, and he coached 3 sports. In fact, your football field up here is named after him. And I was hopeful to come up here because I felt sure that I could play, as opposed to going to Cathedral. And but my family wanted me to go to Cathedral, which I did. But you went from a small environment to a huge environment. and went out for all the teams, football, basketball, and baseball in my freshman year, and got cut. So the sophomore year, tried it again in football, got cut, and that's the year they started soccer at Cathedral. And 17 of us went out for the first team, and 14 of us never saw a soccer ball before. So I finished doing, the 3 years there of playing that. But I always wanted to go to West Springfield High. All my friends, were up here.
Yeah.
It was a good athletic town.
Yeah, I mean, even today it's a good
Oh yeah,
Plano's a good athletic town. Who are some of the most notable townspeople that you interacted with during your time here?
Well, there was Fred Roach. He was the father of my best friend, and he was the superintendent of highways in West Springfield. And I was fortunate enough that he, when any of us turned 16, we could work on the town during the summer on that. Not only that, he felt that the young people in this town that he did hire did a tremendous amount of work. And so he hired us especially on Saturdays for 4 hours for the 3 years that I can remember of actually going down to the center of town in those days and actually cleaning the streets. We did that, on that part. So then there was Terry O'Donnell, who was lived across the street from me. He was vice president of Gilbert and Barker in those days. He was my godfather. And there was I'm trying to think of, that's about it.
So now we're going to dive into your early years in your life. What can you tell me about your childhood?
Well, that kind of is about what I told you in the beginning.
Oh yeah, okay. What is your earliest memory?
I think it would be when I became very close to probably my closest friend of my life, Dick Waite, who moved in about 3 homes up from me. And we probably became, we went to different schools, but we became so close over the years that we roomed together at UMass. I went up there for 1 year after I graduated from Cathedral, and I left after that year and went to Westfield State College, and then Korea broke out, so I enlisted. But Dick and I stayed very, very, very close. And when I got out of the service, he was still up there on a master's program, and we just renewed our friendship all the way through. And even we lived they built Canterbury Way up here for over 55, and my wife and I, we were the 4th ones to move up there. And Dick and his wife came and saw our place, and that was it. He moved in right after that. So he was my closest, and Fred Roach Jr. I was very close to him, and we were best men for each other in our weddings much later. So that would be it on that.
Yeah. Do you have any siblings? And what were they like? And if so, what were they like growing up?
Well, as I said, my older sister was 8 years older than I was, and my youngest one was 4 years younger. And we got along great. I mean, my older sister Ellen was fantastic. She on that part of it, and I was quick to kid a lot with her, and we just became very close. My younger sister was 4 years younger, and so she was. We were at St. Thomas at the same time, but I was ahead of her naturally in school, and the same thing happened later when I went to Cathedral. The year that I graduated is the year she came over there. So we were close, and we had good times together. My mother and father were very family orientated, and my mother was a former teacher, and my father was a good athlete at Dartmouth College many years ago, and he was the one that was in the ski business for the Dartmouth Ski Corporation.
Yeah, and so just to clarify, you grew up in West Springfield.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
so moving on to education now.
Mhm.
So did you have a nickname growing up? If so, how did you get it?
Well, my real name is Edmund, and
Yeah.
for as long as I can remember, my mother and father called me Ned. I have no idea where that name came from, because my father's name was Edmund also.
Yeah.
And I used to think that, kidding my mother, I said, when you call either one of us, we both answer you because it sounds like you're saying Ed all the time. But that's the name I've gone by, but legally on everything, my name is Edmund on that part. And what was the other part? What you asked? What was that question that you just asked?
Did you have a nickname growing up?
No, okay.
Yeah.
That was that.
All right. And so my next question is, who were your best friends? And
Well, I already told you.
oh yeah,
Fred
right.
Roach and Dick Waite. I
Um,
grew up with them in the neighborhood.
so my next question would be, what would you do for fun?
Well, dawn to dusk, sports outside,
Really?
the whole neighborhood. And it was a small neighborhood, so this is quite funny. The way they got us back home at nighttime was each house had a whistle, and a different whistle for
Mm-hmm.
for you, and a different whistle for me, like that. So we did an awful lot of things together. And as we got a little bit older, the three of us actually worked together. Part-time jobs. We all three of us had newspaper roots. We started with a thing called the Springfield Shopping News, which is only Tuesdays and Thursdays,
Mm-hmm.
and delivering those. And that was $4. That was a lot of money, $4 a week on that. And then, as I told you before, Fred's father was the head of the highway department here in West Springfield. And Fred was a year and a half older than I was. But as soon as I turned 16, I was able to, and Dick too, was able to work with the highway department during the summer on that. So, but those were my closest friends. But we just enjoyed the outside. There was there's no entertainment in the house other than the radio.
Yeah.
On that part, and the big thing on the radio was the holidays when there would be the Bob Hope special on the radio the radio that we would listen to at nighttime. But other than that, it was a lot of sports. We did a lot, and that's how I learned an awful lot of sports to play.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How would your classmates, remember you?
Well, I would say I had a good sense of humor, and I was a decent athlete. So, hopefully they would remember me on those aspects. I wasn't one that would aggravate anybody on that because I was, as I said, I had that good sense of humor. Maybe that would aggravate them. I don't know, but just neighborhood stuff. We had two members on our street. We had two men who every 4th of July, because they owned a lot and a half, they could handle this. They'd invite neighbors in and neighbors from other parts of West Springfield in for the 4th of July. And we would have the big celebration up there and the fireworks up there and that. So it was close. It was a very close neighborhood. And when the war started, World War II, it really became close. Really did. In fact, one of the fathers was the air warden on our place. That was something to go through that.
Yeah.
On that.
I'm sure you have some memories of grade school, middle school, and high school. So I believe you already shared some of that.
Yeah.
But do you have any other memories you want to touch upon, or? Or college memories, grade school, high school, college.
In the college, my first year up there, Dick and I went up together, and I had my shot at going out for football because I always got cut,
Yeah.
and I had 3 years of soccer that I played, and the soccer coach was basically waiting for me to come out. And I went out, in those days, freshmen could not play varsity, but I went out for football and made it along with Dick, and we were co-captains and played, and had the unfortunate position about halfway through the season of having a cartilage problem, and that was the end of the football career as far as that goes. And but I finished the year and then transferred to Westfield State and took courses out there, and then the rest. Went to the service after that. But that was good. We had a good relationship. We joined a fraternity up there. When we were on campus, then there were a total of maybe 3,000 on campus at UMass, if you can imagine what it looks like today.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, even when I eventually came back to school, which was quite a few years later, the most we had on campus were 4,500, and half of the men on campus were Korean vets. So that was a very kind of a close unit up there too. So that's pretty much what I have at there.
Yeah. So what did you want to be when you grow up?
I always wanted to be involved in sports. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
There was no question.
Whether it be athlete
A teacher.
or
No, I want to.
teacher?
I like teacher. My mother was a teacher, and I like working with kids, anyways, and on that. But I would say from day one, I always wanted to be involved in coaching, hopefully coaching, and teaching too. And that came a reality, but much later in life for me. I mean, I was pretty well into the 20s there when I graduated. My first assignment at Munson, I was 27 years of age. So, but that's what I wanted to do. I've never had another.
You never had any doubts, second thoughts?
No, I didn't. And it's funny because when I went back to school after the service, well, I didn't go back right away. Things were a little different at that particular time, and my father wasn't well at all, so I became the sole support, and so my college career was delayed a little bit.
Yeah.
But when I did go back, I had a very tremendous friend up there that was my roommate, and he actually was a year ahead of me. I was older in age, but he was a year ahead of me, and he studied to be a chemical engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And when he found out that I took a job at Munson High School, I won't even tell you what the salary was. It was negligible.
Yeah, and that's a great segue too, because we're going to talk about some career.
Oh, okay.
We're going to talk about your career.
All right. Okay.
So, so you're retired, right? You're retired.
I retired in '93.
In '93, right?
I had 30. I had 6 years at Munson High School and 30 years at the junior high and Cowling.
So how old were you when you retired?
I was 63.
63. Okay. Are you still volunteering at all?
Oh yeah. I volunteered. I don't know how many years, but I was on a lot of committees here in town.
Okay.
Baseball rules committees, sports committees.
Interesting.
Yeah. The open pantry.
Yeah.
Did a number of years Operation Santa with Dave Crozier in town here. I stayed exceedingly active all the way through. I just it's only when I turned 85, and this is the same one that I had injured before. Then everything changed because I couldn't stay on committees and can't lift over 5 pounds, stuff like that. But I have no beef coming because I had no problem, really, till I was 85.
Yeah. So you said that's various types of jobs you had with teaching.
Yeah.
You were a teacher at Munson, right?
Yeah.
You were a teacher at Munson in West Springfield, right?
Yeah.
You were also a principal too, right?
Yes, I was. Yes, I started at the junior high. I was a social studies teacher, and I coached 9th grade basketball and scouted for the varsity.
Oh, nice.
Because the thing about this was when I think I told you I started on a committee when I was at Munson
Yeah.
soccer committee, and it was Chris Grammaticus, who at that point was the high school principal.
Right.
And he said to me one time, "Why don't you come back to your hometown?" And I wasn't married at that particular time. And I said, "Well, could I coach the 3 sports?" Kiddingly. And he said, "Oh, no, not like that." So every time he saw me on the committee, he'd say, I hope someday you will come to Westside. And then he became superintendent of schools. And remember, I told you that I loved it at Munson until my principal retired. And we were married then, and my wife and I, and we're both from Westside. We wanted to come back to our hometown. So I talked to the superintendent. He was superintendent then, Chris Grammaticus, and he just shook his head. He said, "There's a beautiful opening at the high school next year. But will you do me a favor and go down and be interviewed by the junior high principal?" And I basically said, I prefer not to, because of my whole life, 6 years, have been working with high school kids. And he said, "Do me a favor." So I went for the interview. It was a tremendous one, Bob Ryan. And it's only for 1 year. But the stipulation was I would coach 9th grade basketball, soccer and basketball, and scout for the varsity, and then get transferred up. And at the end of the basketball season, I called him and told him I found my niche. And he said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, I said, I want to stay here.
Yeah.
And I never left. So I did 30 years with the junior high average. Became vice principal. And then when the principal of Cowing left,
Right.
and I went over there, but I took a gamble, Nick, because it was a smaller school, and our salaries as administrators are back then, were based on your enrollment.
Yeah.
And I knew it took a gamble, and 7 years later, Proposition 2.5 closed Cowing as a junior high. So I came back to the junior high for my last 13 years as vice principal.
Yeah, and so what was Proposition 2.5?
That was passed in Massachusetts. That it was supposedly going to cut excessive spending, and the ones that got affected by this were not the teachers and the principals or the firemen or the policemen, because there was just so much money was coming out of Boston, and that was it. And it affected that as opposed to big business.
Yeah, and so when was, just to clarify, when was the date that it passed?
That was 1980. I was over there from 73 to 80 at Cowing, and it was 1980.
Okay.
Yeah, and it did, and it ended up closing 5 of our schools.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Yeah, we had combined, so I had to come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what type of lessons has your work life taught you, basically?
Well, I don't know. I would say I've always been a people's person to begin with, and I did as much counseling, because I had a degree in that, as I did disciplining when I was the disciplinarian. And at Cowing, I was alone. I had no vice principal because we were a smaller school. We had 450 at that point. So I did the lunchroom, I did the bus duties, and with the kids. And I just have and always have had a pretty good relationship working with kids and whatnot in that respect. So I was firm, but I was fair. And I thoroughly enjoyed that life. And I think a lot of it was because my mother was a very excellent teacher, who years later, when my father was very ill, went back. She hadn't taught in years and years, and the principals absolutely loved her because she just knew how to relate to the kids. So I learned a lot from her in that respect.
Yeah.
Relate to the kids. Don't be judgmental,
Yeah, and just one final question. If you could do anything now, what would you do and why?
Oh, I would want to go right back to the teaching, coaching if I could.
Okay.
Oh, yes. There was no question on that.
All right, well, Ned, we're going to take a short break real quick.
Okay.
And when we return, we're going to talk about historical periods and reflections and family. And we'll be back right after this. Stay with us, everybody. All right, so we welcome you back to to another edition of West Springfield Rotary Club's West Side Legacy Stories. I'm Nick Odell here with Ned Bowler. We're going to start the second half of this program.
Okay.
So we're going to dive into historical periods
Okay.
now.
Okay.
So do you recall how your family was affected by the Great Depression?
Yeah. Initially, my father was not, because of the sporting goods business, especially the winter sporting business out of Hanover, New Hampshire, didn't get hit by this. But many of our neighbors did on that part of it. And we got through, although his income became much less because people were not buying sports equipment and so forth and so on. We did not, we were very fortunate, we did not lose the house. We did lose it, but much, much later, well after the other reasons, but not the Depression. So we lucked out on that, on that part of it. But West Side was hit as every other place. I had neighbors lost their homes and so forth. So it was not a happy time. And, I was very, very young at that particular time, and I wouldn't be even aware of some of the things that had happened on our street because I was born in 1930, so it was right when the Depression, 29, the Depression whacked us,
Yeah. Do you remember where you were when you learned about the attack on Pearl Harbor?
Yes, once again with my friend Dick Wade and
Oh, wow.
and Fred Roach also outside playing as naturally, sports and this and that. And I remember the parents coming out of the house and talking to each other and calling to each other, and we didn't know what it was all about.
Right, yeah.
Finding out that that Pearl Harbor had been bombed, and within a week's time, one of our neighbors, last name was Prentice, became the warden. Every street had a war helmet too. Make sure at nighttime come by and make sure all your shades are drawn down, because there was panic in the country basically that we thought that the West Coast was going to be invaded right after Pearl Harbor. So but the one thing about that, Nick, the seriousness of what happened, not that the neighbors weren't close, but it really brought them close together. Yeah. And we went in, that's when rationing started too, and then you had to have stamps for food and stamps for gas, and depending on what your job was whether you were the A division stamp would get you just gas that you needed. B was for trucks. C was for salesmen, and like that. Rationing, there was rationing all over. I can remember that as a kid, and I was I was 11 when Pearl Harbor. My birthday is December 5th. Yeah. I was 11 at that point. I remember going with my father. We go over to the food stores, and you had to have stamps to get things, and you couldn't get meat a lot of times. So there was it was a different time, but everybody was involved, but everybody was extremely patriotic. I mean, it wasn't a terror time basically for us in that respect, because we just knew we were in. My dad had served in the chemical division in World War I. That's where he got some of his health problems, because they used poison gas back then, and so it was a scary time, but it was also a closeness. We had a closeness.
Yeah. All right. So these next few questions, we're going to go decade by decade a little bit. So starting with the 1950s, you said off camera that you were in the Korean War.
Well, that was Red Bailey, Bobby Bailey, and myself enlisted in 1950, December of 1950.
Okay.
And went through boot camp in Newport, Rhode Island, and then from there to Charleston, South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we got our ship down there too, and then
Yeah.
you know, and then we went from there to shakedown cruises in Guantanamo Bay, and we were in the North Atlantic Fleet. Eventually, over the years, I had already served my time, but eventually the ship did go over to Korea at the very tail end of the war. But we did a lot in the North Atlantic. We were part of the United Nations fleet too, 17 nations that went into the Baltic Sea against the advice of Russia. So that was a very tense time over there too. But yeah, but that's my situation there until our service time was up. And as I mentioned to you before, but I had to work. I could not go back to school for a few years.
Yeah, and so the next decade I want to talk about is the 1960s. There's a lot of events happening in the 60s.
Yeah.
What do you?
Yeah.
A lot of unrest and everything.
Right.
So what do you remember most about that decade?
Well, in 1960, I was still at Munson, and I left there in 63. Met my wife in 61. We got married in 62. As far as when I came into West Springfield to work, I had seventh graders and a couple of one eighth grade class. Within 4 years' time, 3 of my classmates were sent to Vietnam. 3 of my kids that I taught were sent to Vietnam, and by the time the war ended, we had 6 in West Springfield that were sent over there, and 2 lost their lives over there. So it was a tough time for the country. There's no question on that, because it was a unnecessary war. I couldn't believe that we were even over there.
Yeah.
But anyhow, that was pretty much the 60s for me. The one beautiful thing is I got married in the 60s.
Yeah.
1962.
Yeah, and so specifically in the 1960s, there's like I said, there were a lot of events that happened.
Yeah.
So the JFK assassination. Where were you, and how do you remember that?
Well, I think an awful lot of it was I was teaching history in the 7th grade at West Springfield Junior High the day he was shot, and I remember the head of the English department going to the door and knocking on the door, and he said, "Can I come in?" And certainly, and he announced to all of us, that the president had been shot, and that was a stunner all the way through, and having been in the service and having seen death, you grow fast on something like that, and but I have to backtrack. I'm telling you something now, but I'm backtracking to when I was in the service, and we got assigned to South Carolina. We stopped in North Carolina. The train did. It was a troop train, and they gave us an hour's break. And the train, it was an old town. It was down the middle of the street, and that's the beginning of where I saw the persecution of the blacks. It was mind-boggling, because we didn't have that here. We had one black family in West Springfield at that particular time.
Yeah, the 60s were also about the civil rights movement. And, that was an ever-changing time.
It was, and there was tension all over. And on the only African Americans that we saw in the Navy, we didn't see one of them in boot camp. 10,000 men down there. I didn't see one of them. On our ship, they were the cooks for the officers. So, and then of course my experience in Charleston was that was an eye opener when you saw that. when you saw how it was treated.
Yeah, so elaborate down in Charleston what you were doing down there.
We were getting the ships ready. They were World War II destroyers that were covered. They call it mothballs. It's a protective paint on it, and we had to get a whole slew of them ready to ship over to Korea, and that's when that officer went by and talked to us and found out where we were from, and he was the communication officer, and he needed help on the bridge, and that's how this all started. About leaving the deck force and going up to the bridge of the ship, but the um, treatment was terrible. What I saw of the blacks, it was terrible.
So moving on in the 1970s, there's also quite a few events that happened. There was the women's rights movement, the environmental movement, anti-war protests, the Watergate scandal, and President Nixon's resignation. Could you maybe touch upon that, like what you remember about those events?
Well, they were kind of earth-shattering, if you want to call it that, because we were involved again in a war we never should have been in.
Yeah.
And so my empathy, not my sympathy, but my empathy was for those young men and women that had to go back into the service to Vietnam and other places as well. And it was very difficult because I think of my father in World War I, and then World War II, which was for the defense of the world just about. And then we hit Korea. And when we came home from being in the service, we were treated okay because it was the United Nations. There were 22 nations represented in the fighting over there. That was followed by the other wars, which just about was controlled by Washington, and the violence was something terrible, and the loss of life was 50,000 men. 50,000 men. That was So you get kind of, and here I am, a history teacher, and you're trying to preach, not preach, but teach the kids history and the love of the country and whatnot. And it was not an easy time.
Yeah, and since you were a history teacher, I'm sure you remember about the Watergate scandal and President Nixon's resignation.
Yeah.
So what do you remember about that?
Well, just that. It was shock because up until that particular time we had some decent, if I can use that term, decent presidents. We didn't have presidents that were getting in trouble like that. Truman was president when I was in the service, and Eisenhower came after that and whatnot. And we had some good leaders. A couple of them were military leaders or whatnot, but. To me, it was just a tremendous waste, and yet when you're teaching and you're in charge of youngsters, you don't downgrade the government, and you don't, teach anything like that where you're going to say, in any way, shape, or form, get your own feelings in there. Right. You stayed with it, but as I told you, some of my former students. They got drafted in there. A couple of them didn't come back.
Yeah, and so moving on to the more recent decades, anything you wanna touch upon right there? Obviously, recently in 2001, there was the bombing of the Twin Towers in New York.
Yeah.
Do you want to touch?
Yeah.
So what do you remember about that and any other events in recent times?
Well, what I remember about how vulnerable we are. How vulnerable. We just thought that there was no way that anything could happen to us. It hit home in our town. We lost Melissa Harrington Hughes. She was a classmate and a teammate of my youngest girl on the soccer team up at the high school. Yeah. And also they played on her father was the coach of a summer program, a summer team that was made up of all good soccer players, and we went Montreal for tournaments. We went all over. They won New England's. They won everything. She was a very lovely girl. She was a very good soccer player. That hit home.
Yeah.
That hit home on something like that, on that part of it. But I think the vulnerability is what got to me. It's how cheap, you know, one minute you're here and next minute you're not. And how vulnerable we were.
Yeah. And so, any other historical events you want to touch upon before we move on?
Uh, well, no, I can't think of anything off the top of my head right
okay.
now. It's just that I think I'm going to backtrack if I may.
No, it's
Okay.
fine. Go ahead.
Okay. When I was in the service, we made 2 trips 2 years apart
Mm-hmm.
to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, for a shakedown cruise. We came back home and we had more routines. We were up in the North Atlantic. Then we went back down to Guantanamo the following year. I never saw such poverty and sickness in my life when we pulled in, not to Guantanamo, but Santiago. Guantanamo is our Navy base, but we went on a weekend to Santiago.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason we could tie up to the pier is that we had the Commodore. He was in charge of 8 destroyers. He was on our ship. And when they gave us liberty, they said you must travel in groups of at least 4. In dawn, you'll be back here at dusk, you know, before darkness like that. And that's when I saw probably even worse than what was happening in Charleston to the African Americans. What I saw there, and all of us saw there, was the way that Batista, who was the dictator, was treating his own people. We saw the worst conditions you ever saw, and from poor and sickness. You walked up the hill to the top of the hill, and you saw the most beautiful mansions in the world. There was no middle class there, and he was brutal to his people. That's when the communists, you know, and rose up, and it was bound to happen because what he was doing to his own people was horrible. Yeah. And on our base is there. It's still our base, Guantanamo Bay. It still belongs to the United States, even to this particular day. So even with you know, the fact that it's still under communistic rule. But anyways, that was pretty much that.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about. So we're going to move from historical periods now to family.
Okay.
You know, talk about your family.
Sure.
So, how did you and your wife meet?
It's funny. It is. I was working in at the junior high, you know, and whatnot. Because I came to the junior high in the from Munson, and I was working in construction for Adams and Ruxton, who I went to work for when I got out of the service. I didn't go back to school right away. And we were down at the south end of Springfield before 91 was built. And I was a working foreman. Here I go again with, you know, having guys working and I'm in charge, you know.
Yeah.
You know, and this little car pulls up, and it's my good friend Joe Harrington. And I had joined the Knights of Columbus in 1958 in West Springfield. And his father was a past Grand Knight there, who I did not know at the time. And Joe followed me at UMass. He had been in the Coast Guard for 4 years. So when I got to know him is when he came into the KSC. And we both played on the softball team. So he pulls up the car and he says, Ned, he says, let's double date. And I said, Joe, I don't go out here. I go to Boston. All my buddies are down there from school and a couple of the teachers that I know. And he insisted. So finally I said, okay. And we doubled and went to a midget golf with his younger, one of his younger sisters, a beautiful girl. Sheila was a beautiful girl. I was 5.5 years older than she, even though we went through the same schools, St. Thomas and Cathedral, I was always ahead of her. so I didn't know her at all like that. And anyways, she was a nurse down in Boston, public health nurse, and she would come home every 3 weekends. So, I thought, gee, Joe fixes me up with his own sister. I mean, I got to ask her out again. So I asked her out again, and we went out again. And this time we went down to I always marked it down here. I have to mark it down. I forget it. The Wayside Inn. It was located where police cars are down there. It's a beautiful place. It had great meals and a nice combo. Johnny Bergen was the piano player, a lawyer, and all. I can still remember the names. And I loved that music. And jumping ahead, he actually played for our wedding and her 3 sisters' weddings.
Wow.
But at that time, we just didn't hit it off too well. And, I brought her back home. And I had her address. I said, well, I'll give you a call because I go to Boston a lot. And that was October of 1960. August. And I never called her. And the following April, I get a phone call. I lived in a 2-family house with my mother up in Hungry Hill in Springfield.
Okay.
And because my dad had years before that had lost the house in West Side, and the family got split, and they were living in an apartment up in Amherst. So, anyways. So she says to me, this is Sheila Harrington. She said, I'm wondering if you'd like to go to the Mercy Hospital, and she was a nurse, Mercy Hospital alumni dance. So semi-formal in May. And for some reason, Nick, even though I was dating a teacher down in outside of Boston, I said, I'd love to. We went to that, and that was it. That was it. That was the beginning. And we, in July 1st, we got engaged. But her she came back home and was a nurse in Springfield at a couple of the schools. And we couldn't connect as far as when we were going to have the wedding, because it was either this, I being a teacher coach and she being a nurse. So anyways, we decided to wait to June of 62. We were going to save all that money. We're going to save a plug nickel.
Yeah.
We had a wonderful time.
Yeah.
And
So
that was my beautiful part of the 60s, and we got married in 62.
yeah, it's such a great story.
Yeah. She was something very special.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier you have children.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have children, and just clarify again, how many children do you have?
Three. Yeah. And my oldest daughter was a graduate of Assumption College and got her master's in the University of Dallas and her PhD at Georgetown. And she came to work she had 5 years to do her thesis.
Yeah.
And they said, take a break, you got to take a break. And she came home and she was subbing up at the high school here. And got a call from Walter DeFilippi, our town rep. Yep. And she had worked for him when she was in high school when he was running.
Nice.
And he said, I'm now the whip, the Republican whip. And, there aren't many Republicans down there. And he said, I have room for another aide. And she said, I would love to have you come down here. And she said, I don't think so. And she put the phone down. My wife was in the kitchen with her, and she turned to her and says, you got 5 years to do your thesis. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Thought about it, so she went down there. She became an aide down there within 6 months. Now, her whole background was Latin, the classics, and something else, And within 6 months, she was the head of the Research and Development Department of the Republican Party in Boston.
Oh, wow.
And then over the period of time, she became our commissioner. She was a commissioner for 4 governors, and all 4 governors in this Democratic state were Republican, but all 4 knew how to, play both sides of the aisle.
Yeah.
So she did that. And then when the next governor was coming in, they bring in their own. That's how
Right.
she got into. She said no. And then all the insurance companies wanted her. They were very impressed with her. And she ended up going to work in Cairo, believe it or not, for our government.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jimmy was 2 years behind her, and he graduated from West Side High, wrestled. He was on a wrestling team, a good wrestler, and then was came up here. He worked in West Side High, junior high, long after I was out of there, of course, and then Chicopee, and then there was an opening in East Windsor, and he went down there as a teacher, coach, wrestling, coaching that. And my youngest was, all three of them were all Western Mass athletes, and,
Wow.
and the youngest one graduated from UMass, and she's a teacher of special needs, but basically a reading teacher in Ludlow. And so
Yeah.
those are the three.
Nice.
Yeah, great.
So what are your classic? Do you have any classic family stories to share? Jokes, songs.
I'm sure I do. I just pull it out of the air. I know
Any like traditions or something?
Oh well, yeah, we're from the old school. Christmas Eve was let's open up the doors to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
We started that, and my wife was from a big Irish family. I'm Irish, and a little Scotch, but she was full blown Irishman all the way. And I mean, wonderful families around here and wonderful ones up in Vermont.
Mm.
And so we did a lot of family things like that. And we started when Julianne was a junior up at the high school. We started having the families come to our house on Christmas Eve, and we did it for 37 years.
Oh wow!
Like that, and it grew from a few people to I don't know how many, but everybody goes to the kitchen anyways, and parties like that. So we did that. We've carried that on all the way, and when my wife and I moved into the over 55 up here because she had a series of health problems. It took 3.5 years for them to build it.
Mm.
And she only got 9 months because when we were in Florida, I had to rush her to the hospital a couple of times, and she didn't make it the second time.
Yeah.
So she only had nine months there. We continued in that little 1,400 square foot. We've done Christmas Eve with 52 family members there.
Wow.
And now my sister-in-law in Westville has a hall in the area that she lives, so we're doing it over there. So, but we all, we went to Vermont a lot. I love that extended family. It was just, and those were good. They were all good life that we had.
Yeah.
We were married 46 years, so
wow.
For that I'm very thankful.
Yeah, and do you have like you said earlier that you have grandchildren and
Yeah.
Yeah, and how many grandchildren and
I have four grandchildren.
And what were they like too?
Oh, they're good athletes.
Yeah.
The two oldest boys are good athletes for Agawam.
Yeah.
Ryan, the oldest, was soccer and baseball.
Wow.
And then he went to Rhode Island for a year and got it transferred out and got a job as a salesman. But then he went to Hoyle Community and got his 2-year degree, and he's now 29 years of age. I can't believe it. Nikki is 23, I believe it is, and he is very good with his hands in electrical stuff, and he works on these enormous electrical engines for GE. Never went past high school, but I mean, it's a natural in that. And then my youngest has another daughter that's 16, going on 17. She's a junior, and she goes up in South Hadley. She's going to school. And Andrew's the youngest. He's 14. Played football for Agawam. They had a freshman team, a junior high team. So he played on that, and then the freshmen played, and they also played JV. He was on both.
Okay.
So and they're right in ankle arm right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else you wanted to touch upon with family?
Well, the extended family on my wife's side, not my side, is enormous.
Yeah.
And we always are getting together. Right now, my oldest one, the one, Ellen, Julianne, is she's actually in the insurance business, and she has her first home. She's never had a home before,
Right.
always rented. And it's in Jamestown, Rhode Island, and an acre and a quarter of land right by the Newport Bridge. It is gorgeous down there.
Yeah.
She is taken over basically for what her mother did. We always had people, we always had them over. We had 75 there at her place last summer. That's how big that place is in back, and it's all the extended families and whatnot, and we're still doing it in December and whatnot. So that it's I'm very busy. I'm very busy, and even when I can't do this anymore, I help down there as much as I can because it's got a huge place and a lot of gardens. It's just good life. It's a good life.
Yeah, and so moving on to reflection now.
Okay.
My reflection question is, so we're almost at the end. So.
Oh no, that's all right.
Okay.
That's all right.
So who do you think is the most important person in your life?
It's got to be Sheila.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be. Yeah,
Right.
she brought a tremendous amount of, me, I'm going 80 directions at once. She brought a tremendous amount of peace into my life.
Awesome.
And always had that smile. And just, she was like the patriarch of the family.
Yeah.
And my oldest girl now, Julianne, is just like her.
Oh, wow.
And they traveled a lot together.
Mm-hmm.
When Julianne was the head of the she was our commissioner of insurance.
Yeah.
She would have these meetings all over the world, whatnot, and when she could, my wife would go there too and whatnot. So we have that. We still go up to Vermont a lot to see her relatives up there. So, but she was by far my wife was the best thing that's ever happened to me. Like that.
That's cool.
Oh yeah.
So what is the most happiest moment in your life?
Well, two of them. Naturally, one was the marriage
Mm-hmm.
and having the children. We were married 13 months, and Julianne was born. And 2 years later, Jimmy was born, and 3 years later, Ellen was born.
Yeah.
And not only was she a great nurse and a great wife, she was a wonderful, wonderful mother. In the neighborhood, we lived on Adrian Avenue in West Springfield.
Right.
Well, we lived in an apartment when we first got married, but then we lived on Adrian Avenue. And I mean, she got the kids in the neighborhood all organized. We had Thanksgiving things done and everything. It was just, she was the number one, and then the children were number two.
Yeah. So what are the most important lessons you've learned in life?
Well, first of all, I think because of my nature on that, it don't sound like I am, but I'm very tolerant. And my oldest one always reminds me, don't be judgmental,
Yeah.
and she's right on that, because I have the tendency every once in a while to want to call the shots, and it's not my business to do that. But I would say that those are, I look at my three children, and they have so many qualities of their mother. It's fantastic,
Right.
and they're all hard workers. I was a hard worker all my life. They're all hard workers, as my wife was, and she came from a huge family, and we're very close in this huge family. We're always together, like that. So I would say that those were probably the greatest things for me, and my kids, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
What are your proudest moments in your life?
Well, I guess I would have to say next to the marriage would be the birth of the three children and how they finished. They all had to work to finish. They didn't go. Julianne, the oldest one, is the only one that actually went through 4 years high school, 4 years of college, graduate school at what did I say? University of Dallas and graduate school there. The others did the same as I did. You know, they worked their way through on college. Jimmy went to Salem State and left Salem State and worked and then went back to Salem and got his degree and then went working again and then went to Boston, not Boston College, it was BU, and got his master's down there. So, and Ellen too. Ellen very late in life because she had children right away, and she got her degree from UMass.
Yeah, and in terms of your own accomplishments, what was your proudest moment based on your own accomplishments?
Well, I never thought about that, to tell you the truth.
No worries.
But I, responsibility followed me from an early age. I mean, I'm talking real early.
Yeah.
Okay. And I accepted that, and I was thankful that I could do it.
Right.
On that, and I never turned down leadership. Never. I was always involved in something that, keeping the family together the best I could, and definitely with the children and whatnot. So I would say that, when you go to college in 1948 and you graduate in 57, that's 9 years.
Yeah.
So it took time. It's because of all these other things that happened in my life.
Moving on, we're just about almost done here. But before we end this, is there anything would you want to discuss that we haven't discussed yet?
Well, I have my notes here. I'd like to. There was a section in there that said what changes I had seen in the structure in the town here too, and when whoops.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, you can just leave it.
Yeah.
Just leave it.
Yeah. The growth of the town.
Yeah.
I know I gave you a figure before that was wrong, and I can remember being not as a young kid, 4 and 5 years old, but when I was born, there were approximately 11,000 people in town, and then it just grew and grew on that part. Riverdale Road was a 2-lane highway. It had no structure. It had no middle barrier whatsoever. You had Ashley Street, went off it right by police, went off it, and went over to the Chicopee Bridge, which doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Okay? We were a farming community way back then. Oh God, what were their names? Bagg, B-A-G-G. The Bagg family was very wealthy, owned tremendous property on Riverdale, and a lot of farms. We had fruit farms, Bartlett Farms up on Dewey Street. He actually was a teacher at the high school.
Bartlett, yeah.
Yeah, Herb Bartlett.
Bartlett, yeah.
Yeah, and we as kids, Dick Waite and myself especially, we're looking for work when you're 14, 15 and whatnot. We'd work in the orchard there, with him. The Dunn family lived, as you go up Rogers Avenue, as you go up the hill, and there are very few homes, but right there, his home. And he had a fruit farm there, fruit trees there, but he also sold wood, apple wood, which if you've ever burnt a log of apple wood, it's beautiful. Yeah. It gives you the most heat, and there's a nice odor to it too. So we would go up there. His property went way down and back, almost hit Dewey, and there were brooks in there. And we used to go fishing there, actually fishing there. When we were kids, we went skating in town. There were where Rogers Avenue comes into Dewey Street on an angle was an ice house
Oh wow.
They actually cut blocks of ice there,
Wow.
to ship and
Yeah.
to bring to the neighbors. And a section of it was for skating, like that. I mean,
Yeah.
Puddington's Pond, which is off of Rogers Avenue, about 100 yards in, same thing.
Yeah.
So, there were a lot of things we did. We started going to the dances down at the YMCA, and we didn't know how to dance. So Marilyn Smith, she later became Marilyn Tansey, and she became a phys ed teacher at the junior high. She was a year ahead of me, but she taught us how to dance, so that on Saturday night we could go to the dances there. It was so safe. The people, the women, the girls, they could just walk up for the friendlies after a dance. We're talking 10 o'clock at night, or the igloo, which is on the other side there. It doesn't exist anymore, like that. I mean, and it was a very almost safe environment back then. Nobody had much of anything. It was that kind of a life. So
Yeah. Do you think kids stayed out of trouble because of the dances?
Oh, I think so. Not that we didn't have a lot of big trouble. I mean, you'd have your I mean, I don't even remember houses being broken into or whatnot, but there was a lot of rivalry, and the rivalry could lead to a little problem between West Side and Agawam when it came to football time. But that was normal. Nothing extra, nothing like you see today. No, and I think because of what was going on in the world had a lot to do about how we just kind of banded together.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in the Depression and in World War II, followed by Korea.
Yeah, and how would you most like to be remembered?
Oh, that I was a good person and cared for the kids and considered myself a good teacher. In history teacher. I loved history, love it. I devour books on history right now at home.
Yeah.
Basically, I don't read anything I read all the no fiction. I'm just like that. That I was good. That I was a good father and a good husband, and definitely with the kids that I learned to be tolerant, and I really, what my oldest girl said to do, I really did my best not to be judgmental. There, but for the grace of God, go I when you see certain problems going on. And I had a great empathy for the kids, that were in trouble.
Right.
And I always thought, and even today, Jimmy tells me, Dad, I keep bumping into buddies, and they said, boy, your father, he saved me. He sat me down one time, and he straightened me out, just said, you got a nice home, and this, that. So I like to be remembered as being, very close to the youth, and being a good teacher and a good coach, and better than that, being a good person.
That's great.
Yeah, and what I did too, Nick, even before I was administrator, when I was a teacher, is I made sure that I would go to games that these kids were playing, like the junior high, they have a junior high football team or something. Or I'd show up at a baseball game or something like that, I'm not the guy that sits in the office or is in there watching a lunchroom, you know what I mean? So it was, feel very comfortable. I'm very comfortable in this town. The people have been marvelous.
Yeah.
I'm outliving them. I'm outliving an awful. I've gone to so many wakes and funerals the last 3 years, but that's what I would like to be remembered about being.
That's such a great thing
decent person
to say. Yeah, it's such a great thing to say. Well, Ned, thank you for being on the show today.
Well, thank you, thank you very much, Nick.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing your life stories and memories and whatnot. It was truly a pleasure to be here.
Glad to do it. Glad to do it.
To be here to listen to all that. So,
okay.
So that does it for this edition of the West Side. Of the West Springfield Rotary Club's West Side Legacy Stories. I'm Nick Odell. We'd like to thank Ned Bowler again for being on. And we'll see you guys next time. Take care.